okay, we've had this huge surge in immigration the last couple of years, and now the complete reversal. And my first question is just around how do you look through that pass through into the data? So we've obviously seen the labor force participation rate dwindle down, and now you've had this interesting situation where just in this recent report, we've seen an unemployment rate that's stayed pretty low compared to what's going on in these major revisions in the non-farm prints. So yeah, what's the right way to think about how immigration is affecting this data?
So the first thing is, and it's funny because it's been very under discussed, and I'm hesitant to bring it up because I don't want people to freak out. But it's actually like estimating the population is one of the hardest things that that the government, the Census Bureau, has to do. The BLS basically is relied on census estimates, and in fact, like given that the administration is talking about doing certain things with the census, I don't know if they'll be able to do it. Like, could be even more of a problem, right? Like but I think that's sort of the reason I bring that up is the BLS conducts census every 10 years. You have to guess. And when I say guess, I mean educate, I guess. You have to estimate what is happening in the interim. And part of the problem is that data, the census every 10 years. You're going to wait 10 years to get an accurate estimate. You're not. You're going to have interim sources that are of decent quality. And then for very recent data on population, you're guessing. Like you literally have there's projections. It's a model. So it's not like they're just like, oh, I don't know. But it is like the recent population data gets shakier. And what we saw early last year is the BLS finally updated and or the Census Bureau updated and concluded, in fact, that not only were they undercounting population growth in 2024, but in fact several years back. So we got this big jump. If you look at some of the household survey series, like the level of employment or level of labor force and level of employment, or even the level of unemployment, they all got like a big jump up because it was implemented in one shot in the BLS data. And the reason I mention this is like right now, census models are assuming slower population growth underlying it, which, by the way, does not go to non-farm at all. Like non-farm, we talk about slower payroll growth because of population growth. That has nothing to do with census estimates. They don't use it. It's just consistent with that. We actually don't fully know how much the population growth has slowed. We have census, again, the census projections, but it could be those trying to be wrong. Maybe they're actually now, after several years of underestimating population growth, they're overestimating it because they're slow to adapt to how aggressively we clamp down on immigration. Maybe deportations. We don't have great data on what is going on there, but maybe they're bigger than people think. And in fact, it's possible that population growth or labor force growth or potential labor force growth really has ground to a halt. We don't have a really good idea on that. We can guess, but I think there is a very good reason to think that population growth has slowed. And so we're in this world where employment labor force growth is slowing because our population is aging and we're letting fewer young people in across the border. To keep what's in the denominator of the unemployment rate, it's the labor force. And so if you're adding fewer people, then to keep the unemployment rate steady, you need to add less to employment each month. And if you're growing the labor force very slowly, then that number, I mean, theoretically, by the way, if at some point we still have very low immigration and the population is aging a lot, it could even be that negative payroll growth, negative employment growth, instead of the steady unemployment rate. I mean, like I drew this analogy somewhere of like, look at Japan, look at Southern Europe. These are countries with an aging population, the prime working age, native born population is not growing. In some cases, it's shrinking. And again, they have, in some cases, quite tight labor markets in a world where like they're not adding net jobs. And I think and the reason I mention this is it's sort of this, we're used to our framework always think about these numbers as big payroll number, strong job market, weak, low payroll number, weak job market. And I think we have this force here that is causing that to change in a way that is not tied to like what we think of as the labor market strength instead of slack. So to pick an example, during 2023, right up until at least early 24, we had big jobs numbers. They got revised subsequently, but like you still look at it and those numbers are in the 20 teens are considered like solid. In some cases, their numbers were more than solid, but like again, it's a decent run, and the unemployment rate headed up. I mean, there were some periods where months where the unemployment rate headed down or stable, but just generally, there was a period like that's when we triggered the SOM rule, right? And then there were
Right.
some revisions on
Right.
this debate whether the SOM rule was ever triggered, but like the unemployment rate went up by a lot during that period, and now all of a sudden we have a bad jobs report, but it comes in the context of the unemployment rate being pretty stable. It was at 4.2 something, or about 4.2 in July of 2024. It's now at 4.2 again. And maybe we're in the start of a new uptrend, but just generally it was flat for a year. And the reason I bring that up is like we're sort of in a world of lower job growth, but the unemployment rate not zooming up. And I think that labor supply and immigration is the big story. I think again, it does not. There's some debate over whether that's what's caused unemployment to stabilize. But just saying, in terms of that relationship between the trajectory of the unemployment rate and non-farm payroll growth that we thought we had coming in, it's repeatedly been like thrown off sides by labor supply growth, first zooming up in 2023 and early 24, and then crashing since the second half of 2024.
Okay, so is the right way to characterize this that okay, you have labor supply coming down, but you have labor demand coming down at a pretty equal rate? And if so, like what is the net impact of that?
Yeah. So first, I think a boring answer. Chair, I felt good when Chair Powell said this because I've sort of been playing around with it as well, and he's obviously much smarter than me. So I felt whenever somebody smarter, more famous agrees with me, I feel good. Um, but jokes, levity aside, I think it is a good way of thinking about it right now. I would not view it as like some sort of permanent state of affairs. I think that's sort of it. It's like so far, yes, that's what sort of happened. But like I share this gif from like I think one of the Naked Gun movies of Leslie Nielsen saying nothing to see here while things are blowing up. I think the point is there's nothing to see here if you're just looking at unemployment in isolation. Meanwhile, there's all these huge things happening and they're pushing into each other. If they've offset so far, it does not mean they're going to keep offsetting each other durably. Like maybe it is that the demand side effects of the tariffs are going to really start kicking in, and so July's report, which was bad, is followed by an August report that's bad, and a September report that's bad, and all of a sudden we find ourselves with an unemployment rate north of 4.5% by the end of the year, maybe even close to 5%. That's one possibility. The other one is, by the way, that we sort of talked about is like the immigration squeeze is ongoing and has the potential to get worse because we are still to some extent in the process of absorbing like that big boost of labor supply. And what if it turns out the labor supply squeeze is so strong um, that we are potentially dealing with a tighter labor market a year from now? A small, like essentially a low growth, low employment growth, but like tighter labor market. It's not my base case, but is it outlandish to think this could happen? No, I definitely don't think so. And it's hard because again, what we were sort of there's Jed Kolko has some me and other people and Stan Voiger and Wendy Edelberg they've all done like these amazing estimates of what they think the the break even payroll number is. People ask me like, what do you think the breaking payroll number is? These things are hard to actually estimate with precision because so many things underlying it. Like there's the birth death model that can affect that estimate. Census population estimates will change it because if census population estimates are too high, then that means the payroll break even number will naturally actually be lower than we think. But the gist is just it's lower. And I think that these forces push against each other in terms of labor market slack, but they're both pushing payroll growth down.